achieving that goal. He was born on a date that will live in infamy, December 7th, although it was 1924, and died on a day we all remember our heroes, Memorial Day, which this year coincided with Shavuot, when the gates of heaven are open. As my friends Joel Waterstone and Steve Levine said, my dad was the original, most interesting man in the world. He consorted with kings and princes, billionaires, and common folk. He sought and found adventure, education, women, the love of my mother, and a family that loved him dearly. As you heard, he spoke 6 languages fluently: French, Greek, Italian, Arabic, Ladino, which is Judeo-Espanol, and English. And as Mayor Salama told me, my dad's Arabic was so refined that if not for my dad, he would never have known that anyone could speak that language so impeccably. In 1979, my parents took me, along with them, on an epic cruise. When we arrived in Egypt, there was some doubt as to how we would be received. With the ship at the dock, we looked off the rail onto the shore and saw a single officer walking up the ramp with a card table to stamp the passports. Then a military transport vehicle was there and a limousine. A general got out and ordered some gun-carrying soldiers onto the ship, and no one was allowed to leave. The soldiers started calling, "Behar! Behar!" My dad gave his passport to my mom in case they were going to arrest him. And he told us not to leave the ship. Instead, they informed us that my dad's high school best friend, Dr. Adham El-Naguib, had sent a military transport to give us a royal welcome. After all, he was married to the last queen of Egypt and pulled some strings. The officer made sure we were the first people to get their passports stamped, and we were directed to the limousine where the general was waiting to greet us. He told us that he was there to personally escort us to our hotel. Way off to the side, there was a small group of men standing by 2 cars. And my dad spotted them out of the corner of his eye and said in his impeccable Arabic, "Thank you for coming, and send Dr. El-Naguib my regards, but we will be leaving with those men over there." The general did not understand and was firmly trying to impress to my dad his intent to carry out his orders to take us to the hotel. Finally, my dad said, "Ricky, Shirley, come with me." The men at the 2 cars made no indication that they were there for us, signaled us not at all, but who wants angry army generals coming after you? When we got close, the oldest of them came and firmly shook my father's hand and my dad introduced us to Ahmed, his childhood chauffeur. And his family. We went to my dad's old home where the vice president of Volkswagen Africa was now living in the estate. He wanted to know, we just cold called. We knocked on the door and he wanted to know what our intentions were and whether we were there to reclaim any of my family's personal belongings. And my heart screamed, "Of course we are!" But I was 18 years old and kept my mouth shut. We took some pictures, took nothing per my father's instructions, and left. That evening, Dr. El-Naguib held a huge soiree in my dad's honor, inviting all the old Victorians to a formal, very formal dinner, attended by royalty from the Middle East. It was the only time I ever saw my dad completely in his element, speaking all his languages at once. I've told a lot of people my dad's unique life and some of his epic adventures and amazing circumstances, but we all lead unique lives. We are all one of a kind. What was different was that my dad was raised and bred and educated for aristocracy and upper crust life. Yet he lived a middle-class existence. With the flip of a political switch, he, like many Jewish families, went from wealth to poverty or worse. And with education in hand and a background like few others, or no others, he set out to create a life that would provide not only for him and his growing family, but for his aged parents, who lost all of their assets under Nasser in Egypt, and came to the USA speaking more languages than my father, but none were English. At age 70, my grandfather opened an encyclopedia and read it from A to Z to teach himself English. In 1989, we got a phone call from a man who asked my sister Lisa if this was the same Marcel Behar who had lived in Toronto. He said, "Tell him David Robinson called." It may have taken 34 years for him to join our family, but it only took 1 second for me to accept you as my brother and friend. Since David joined our family, my parents' relationship has flourished. And I'm not sure if my dad was humbled by that experience or just came to terms with his life, but my dad definitely became a better version of himself in these later years. David and my sister-in-law Doris have been equally fantastic children to my parents. Here we are, a Jewish family, and they were both raised with Christian beliefs, with extended families of their own in Canada, yet they spend every Christmas holiday in Orange County with us. My mom's level of acceptance and understanding is beyond compare and speaks volumes to who she is and what she's capable of. My dad was a sucker for the national anthem. He cried every time it was performed well. He was an exceedingly patriotic, naturalized citizen in the way someone who personally knew the alternative firsthand would grasp the virtues of the Constitution. He loved America and was proud to defend her in any conversation. He never pretended to be something he wasn't. He was the original WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. Nothing more, nothing less, unless you were in his immediate family. And then there was always something more. I was constantly surprised by his unsolicited acts of kindness towards me and other members of our family. Beyond that, if I did ever ask him for anything, the answer was never no. All the no's were used up on Mark and Shirley. By the time I came around, it was okay. And for Lisa, it was always yes to his one, his only, most beloved, darling daughter. My mom was the most dedicated wife and caregiver any spouse could ever ask for. Her dedication to my dad is the sole reason he made it as far as he did. My mother deserves all the credit for keeping us together, showing us all the love we could ever need, and often more than that, and being the true Aisha Kyle that she is. A woman of valor. With the 5 grandkids around, Joseph, Jacob, Daniel, Nisim, and Lily, and realizing he wasn't going to be around forever, he started using a phrase we rarely heard, first by telling the grandkids, "I love you." Eventually, we started hearing it more often too, although the standard phone call went something like this. "Dad, you're the greatest. I love you so much. Thank you for everything." "Okay, thank you for calling. Goodbye," was his typical response. But he always told my wife he loved her. They were the 2 Africans in the family, and understood each other a little better than the rest of us. He loved TG beyond expectation, and he went out of his way to do anything that would help her. Even before we were married, when her car broke down, he immediately came to her rescue and paid cash for a brand new car for her. He didn't do that for anybody. He didn't do that for me. He was very proud when I told him I would honor our family tradition, naming my son Nisim. Throughout the last 8 years of his life, we thought we were putting carrots in front of him, giving him reasons to get to the next life cycle event. It started with Lisa's wedding. After he danced the first dance with Lisa, he walked off the dance floor and told my mom, I kept my promise and danced with my daughter at her wedding. The truth is, he did not need us to dangle any life cycle events to get in front of him to string his life along a little longer. We learned what a fighter he is. We learned about real strength from him. We learned what it means to be the patriarch of a family. And we learned all this when he was in his frailest state. You heard what happened from Mark the last few days. He told my mom, I love you above all else, in clear, loud words. He gave each of us a blessing, raising his hand and putting it on our foreheads and saying, Hashem Ishmareha. With God's will, he will watch over you and protect you. This is a blessing we received every time we left the house for the unknown. And for David and Doris, via FaceTime, he raised his hand to the screen, blessed them, and said to David, always remember, you are my son. Each of the spouses of my siblings has been amazing in every way possible over the years. I don't know a set of siblings and spouses who get along as well as we do. I love them all with a heartfelt love, and I thank Jeff, Leslie, Doris, Richie, and my wife TG for being the model in-laws and an example of acceptance and love. And this is 100% a result of the amazing parenting we were blessed with receiving, the softness and love of my mother, and the strength and guidance of my dad. On the day he died, I woke up at 4:30 in the morning and went to his bedside, where I found him wide awake. I asked him if he wanted me to talk to him, and he nodded yes. I started recounting his entire 90-year life. It took me 4 hours, and he listened intently to every word, raising his finger and waving at me when I embellished or pronounced a name wrong and mouthing the word or telling me the year that was incorrect. He was still 100% there. When I left him for 3 minutes to go wash my hands, he shouted, Shelly! One last time, loud and clear, and we heard him in the back of the house. This was his standard call for the last 60 years when he needed a drink of water, a scratched back, his newspaper, or any of a million little details he thought only my mom could perform for him. And my mom has been faithfully by his side for those 60 years. He was fully cognizant up until the very end and passed away peacefully with my mom and I singing Sephardic romanceros to him, and Mark and Jerome holding his hands. He lived his life on his terms and succeeded in every imaginable way, and most importantly, in creating a family that loves each other unconditionally, and appreciated him for how he prepared us to face the world and lead our individual